Brandon, you ready to do this?
I'm ready.
All right, come on up. We'll change out mics. Do you have a slideshow or anything, or do you want me to?
Yeah, it's on there.
It's already up.
Do we have a clicker? Is that a?
Yes, we do.
Perfect.
There you go.
Great.
I'm gonna hit the.
As long as it works. All right, thanks everybody. My name's Brandon Quigley. I have a couple slides that I'll go over. So a little bit about me. I've lived in Coeur d'Alene for 25 years. Been in the lending industry for 20 years. I've been with my current employer for 15 of those. I have two daughters. One of them just turned 18 and one of them is 19. My 19-year-old is a senior at Boise State. My 18-year-old is getting ready to go to Carroll College in Helena, Montana. They both did the dual enrollment, so she'll be enrolling at Carroll College as a junior, 17 years old, 18, which is kind of crazy. I have the best wife in the world, and she said so. No, that's actually true. She's awesome. She supports me in everything I do, and she's just the best ever. I love Coeur d'Alene, and I love what I do. So what I am, above everything else, I'm a father, a husband, and a friend, student in my profession. I'm always learning. I am a total geek about numbers, finance, real estate, everything like that. Passionate real estate investor, avid traveler, and I believe in work hard, play hard. What I am not is a know-it-all, conspiracy theorist. I talked to one on the phone today. It's just weird to me. That's not me. An expert at your profession, unless you're Mark, and then I actually am an expert at his profession, but I'm not at yours, any of yours, and I'm not better than anybody else. So we got that out of the way. So I don't know how to, I'm going to try my best to make this as interesting as I can to everybody in this room, because there's a really super diverse group that we have here. I mean, there's contractors and home inspectors and junk people and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to talk about, like Nick said, the financial crash of 2008 and how where we're at right now in the economy is completely different than that. Some very small similarities, but overall we're completely different. And you'll learn by the end of this, my take is that we're not going to repeat what happened in 2008, although some people are saying that we are. So this is just some of the stuff that we went through back in 2008. Who in this room was in some way, shape, or form tied to the real estate industry in 2008? Okay, so probably half of the people in here, roughly. So you probably all remember some of this. Average home prices fell 31.8%. That was a whole lot higher in Kootenai County, I can tell you that. And I'll get into that a little bit later, why certain pockets of the United States, including Kootenai County, were hit harder than the average numbers are. So this is a timeline of what happened in just the year in 2008. So central banks cut rates, whole bunch of boring financial stuff. Lehman Brothers fails. The GSEs are nationalized, which I'll talk to you a little bit about that again also. And finally, in December of 2008, they finally declared a recession, which, again, I'll talk to that a little bit more as well. So nobody really talks about 2007, but really, it started to get really bad in 2007. So you can see on this timeline, really early in 2007, there was big trouble on the horizon, and it just got worse and worse and worse. My favorite one in this whole batch, August 17th, the Fed cuts rate by 0.5 point, warning that the credit crunch could be an risk to economic growth. It could be. And then this is another favorite of mine. In May 17th of 2007, big swing in Ben Bernanke says, the mortgage defaults will not seriously harm the U.S. economy. So yeah, we all know how that story ends. So if you look at a chart of about 15 years prior to the financial crisis, you can see that we are maintaining about anywhere between a 2 and 3% delinquency rate on residential mortgage loans. And then 2007, 2008 started, you can see we peaked up around 11.5%, people that were in some sort of default on their mortgage, and then it slid down after that slowly. So the fix to the problem where there were a lot of different mortgage financial reforms. In July of 2008, George Bush signs into public law the Housing Economic Recovery Act and establishes FHFA, Federal Housing and Finance Authority. September, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were placed into conservatorship. So whether you like it or not, as long as they're in conservatorship, you as a taxpayer are guaranteeing that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to be solvent as long as they're in conservatorship. Big one in my industry, July of 2010, the Dodd-Frank Consumer Protection Act was born. So that changed everything in lending from that point forward. This is an interesting quote here. This is a Harvard professor. One defense, albeit a small one, against the next crisis is the fact that we are still talking about the last one. If you ask why we're less vulnerable, some of it has to do with regulation, but a lot of it is that people are just still on the edge of on edge even 10 years later. The best part is at the bottom. Otherwise put, there's something to be said for the old expression, once burned, twice shy. Then again, we can always do something stupid. So, I mean, is the repeat of 2008 completely impossible? I would say absolutely not. We're still stupid humans, right? So moving forward a little bit, you've got your 2008. This is when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac went into conservatorship, and the U.S. government started buying mortgage-backed securities and Treasury securities. We were just starting to ease that and get back to a little bit of semblance of normalcy, right, in 2019. And then spring of 2020, right here, something happened. COVID hit, and all of a sudden the government was kind of forced back into the mortgage and Treasury buying business again. But you can see the projection for what's going to happen in 2022 and 2024. I've heard some people in here talking about interest rates going up. Without the government artificially keeping interest rates down by buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, that's going to happen. And there you can see the tailing off of the purchasing there. So this is the kind of a different chart of the delinquency rate. So starting back in 2008, it went up real high, and it slowly kind of gradually came down and down and down. A couple little random spikes, and then 2020, again, you got a sharp increase in delinquencies. Some charts that I've seen, they don't even report them because technically if somebody was in a forbearance program, they weren't delinquent. So that's a whole nother conversation, but they don't even talk about them. So some of the current headlines, actually, I'm going to grab this piece of paper here real quick. Sorry, if you don't mind. There's some headlines that are in the news right there. These are all within, if you look at the dates on these are all within the last, 90 to 120 days. Will the housing market crash? A housing bubble is on everyone's mind. Housing market predictions, crash versus boom. This is one that I found today. Waiting on the housing market to crash? Don't, experts say. Here's how today's market is different from the Great Recession housing bubble. So this person kind of agrees with what I'm trying to say. And how we were really, really spoiled for a few years on interest rates being ridiculously low. And everybody's kind of, pardon my French here, but I'm not going to say that. Everybody's crying a little bit right now about what interest rates are at and what they're doing. But really, if you look at, this isn't a 100-year chart. This is a, 20-year chart, 18 or 20-year chart. And I would say, if we're in the fives right now, kind of average, right? Like for the last 20-something years. So keep things in perspective maybe a little bit when you're thinking about what rates are doing. So this is, I think, maybe what everybody in this room would be a little bit interested in. It's not all doom and gloom. This ties right into what Nick was just talking about. So here are year-over-year home price changes. Obviously, there's a big run up in 2021 and 2022. If you start talking about a housing market crash, I don't know what technically defines a crash. I would say probably 20+% price reductions, something like that. They're saying in February of 2023, our rate of increase is going to slow to 14%. Now, I'm not saying that Zillow is the all-knowing and I know how a lot of you in this room feel about Zillow. This is just one forecast, if you will. But I've seen anywhere from, maybe the appreciation rate slows to, maybe the lowest I've seen is 8%. Still a pretty healthy rate of growth, really. So I love Let's Go Brandon. I just keep telling everybody, everybody's just so supportive lately, like my name's Brandon and everybody's rooting me on, it seems like. So I don't know how much time do I have for questions? A few minutes?
Really, we have the room for another hour. So
okay.
Yeah, we're open for questions.
So anybody can ask any questions they want, anything having to do with lending, my theory on things, which you probably don't care about, historical stuff that happened 12, 15 years ago.
What's your theory?
So I think that the financial crisis of 2008 was tied to bad loans and bad assets across the board. It wasn't just mortgage-backed securities. There's a lot of other stuff that, these bonds and everything were AAA rated. You've heard that thrown around through the years. They had these rating insurance companies. It was actually on one of my slides. I didn't want to read every slide, but some of the stuff that was happening in 2007 and 8 is a lot of the rating agencies that rated these securities that were being sold, they went out of business. They folded or they got sued or whatever it was. Their grading system for rating these securities that were being traded was horrendous. It was horrible. They weren't even looking. They were just, it'd be like if I told you this car I'm selling you, it runs like a champ, and you just took me at my word, even though it's got a cracked head or something. That's what they were doing. They were looking at the body and telling you that the engine was good, and they didn't have any sort of methodology for going through what they were rating, and that's really the biggest problem. Well, you're going to run into problems when you're lending people money that don't have any income, they don't have any assets, and they have no business in taking out loans. You're going to run into problems no matter what. So that was the lion's share of the issues, though. Yeah, go ahead.
So in the 80s, early 80s, we got to 12, 14, 15% interest. What caused that, and what kinds of things could happen now to drive that kind of interest rate growth in the next decade?
It's a great question. I think the biggest concern right now would be inflation. It's funny you bring up the 70s and 80s, because I think if a lot of people are trying to compare what's going on right now in the real estate market to 2008, I would say compare it to 1979 to 1981, really, if you wanted something that was more apples to apples, because you had hyperinflation, you had commodities that were very, very expensive, you had a lot more housing demand like we do now. And so it was a true inflation, and there's a lot of similarity to those markets. So I think 40 years later, I don't know that our economy would allow for double-digit 30-year interest rates anymore. I don't see that happening, but only the depth of the inflation, and then obviously things like other possible world wars and global economic things. Until we know the extent of all those things, we won't know how high rates will go. There's a lot of people that are smarter than I am that think that rates probably won't get much above 6%. Maybe they cap at 6 to 6.5, maybe 7. I don't know. Yeah, a 30-year interest rate. Yeah. Go ahead.
Did anything happen where the rating companies are watched more closely?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's constant regulation. Part of the Dodd-Frank Act and a lot of the other, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB, they do random audits of banks and lending institutions financial institutions, everybody that has anything to do with money, they go through routine audits, and there's report cards, if you will, and you can actually look them up on publicly traded companies and see how they're doing on their their ratios, how much money they have on deposit and how much they're lending out. So
Another rating company kind of idea?
yeah, I wish that would be the case. I think there's just more of a consistent grading scale, and rather than just somebody kind of turning a blind eye and saying, yeah, that one's really good, the scorecard has actual data on there. So, I think that if somebody was just fraudulently putting data on there, there's multiple sets of eyes that are doing it. Because you have, like, just for an example, you would have a CFO of a company preparing the numbers, and then the regulators coming in. And if there's any red flags that come up during an audit, they're going to get another set of eyes on it. So I guess the answer to the question is yes, there definitely are multiple sets of eyes. For sure. I saw another hand. Yeah, go ahead.
You said inflation was a big concern of yours now, and probably tied to 7981. Obviously, besides inflation making prices go up, what other factors might it contribute to that we may not be aware of, or that you see as a possible effect?
So that is a very loaded question, but I think some of the differences, I'll just start with this, going back to the 79-81 time frame, we as a nation are a lot less dependent on a lot of the same energy sources that were around back then. So I don't know if I wasn't alive I was alive, but I was a small child during that time. But the gas shortages, that was a big problem. You'd have lines at gas stations for miles and miles, not because people were afraid of prices going up or because Costco was 4 cents cheaper, but they had limited supplies of gasoline. And so things like the commodities and the energy resources, they put a lot bigger strain on the economy back then than they do now. And, I also, on the flip side of that, I think that like what Nick was talking about a little while ago, I think the supply and demand aspect of today's economy is a much more interesting factor that needs to be talked about, because he nailed it. Like, what tomorrow is going to spark a huge drop in demand for housing? I mean, I almost bite my tongue saying that, because I can almost remember saying that in 2007. And we all know how that ended. But it's just a totally different market now. And going back to what I mentioned originally about how the 2008 crash impacted North Idaho a lot more than it did other areas of the United States. At that point in time, and still today to a certain extent, we had a huge concentration of second homes, speculative investment properties, and investment properties that had a low occupancy percentage. That is a horrible recipe for an area like ours to get really pounded by home prices going down and a recession in the economy. So, Oklahoma City might not have been impacted percentage-wise as much as Coeur d'Alene. I've seen stats for Kootenai County, Idaho, where the average home value lost 43% of its value, compared to 31% nationally. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any idea how many homes now have that low occupancy compared to back then?
I don't, and I don't think that it's a lot. I see occupancy stats nationwide. I don't know if and where I can get those locally, but nationally, the vacancy factor for rental properties right now is under 2%, 1.8 or 1.7 or something like that, which is extremely healthy. It's a really, really good. I mean, anything under 5 is considered good. It's kind of like the months of inventory. I mean, this is unhealthy low. Sarah, go ahead.
If we did hit a recession, how do you think that would impact the area now compared to in 2008?
Well, again, I think there's different areas that it could impact. Generally speaking, in a recession, you have high unemployment. I don't see high unemployment being something that's going to turn around and bite us tomorrow. You usually have lots of houses on the market. You have high inventory. Again, I don't really see that happening either. You have really high commodity prices, which that very well could continue, but we have ways of avoiding that. I was down in San Diego last weekend, and I'm not exaggerating, like every third car is a Tesla. So if gas prices go to $7 a gallon, they don't care, you know. I mean, granted, they have a $1,000 a month car payment on that thing, but you know, but that's another story altogether. Go ahead.
What's the discussion that you're hearing in your circles of potentially having a 40-year mortgage come out? And
Yeah.
what maybe restrictions will be that if had come out and say like a certain population can use it or not?
Yeah, so the only mainstream conversation that I've been hearing about 40-year loans are more of like a workout option for people that were either in forbearance or that are going to eventually run into problems making their mortgage payments. It would be kind of the modern day HARP, if you remember that. You know, after the crash in 08, they had a refinance program where basically anybody that could fog a mirror, they would refinance your loan just to keep from taking your house back. You know, and so that's what they're talking about from what I'm hearing on a 40-year loan term. Nick.
I just want to make a comment also. You mentioned like with 2008, the job situation, 2008 to 10, you know, it had to be really local, right? I've noticed so much over the last few years, especially the last 2 years, people moving here, they don't have to quit their jobs anymore.
That's right. Telecommuting is a big factor.
And they're working remotely, so the local jobs isn't so much a factor like it has been, you know, the entire history of real estate. It's now you can work from wherever you have internet.
Yeah.
And we have internet here in North Idaho, and it's not as much of a factor as it normally would be in the past.
That's right. I saw a really interesting presentation in San Diego last weekend that a gal from CoreLogic out of LA came and did for us. And it was a map of the United States and where everybody was moving from and to. And it was very, very detailed. And it showed, you know, gross and net population increases and decreases state by state. And it was even drilled down to like if somebody is leaving Seattle, what percentage of those people are staying in Washington state? Which percentage of them are leaving the state? And if they do leave, what other states are they moving to? It was very fascinating. I can try to get my hands on that slideshow and share it with y'all if you're interested. Yeah, go ahead.
The other factor that's different from 2008, much like what Nick was talking about, is liquidity. There's a lot of cash still in the market and still looking for a home and somewhere to go. Your chart that showed the drawdown of assets, what do you think that does? It looks like, from your chart, it looks like that's still a lot of cash in the market, even if they start drawing down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really an unhealthy percentage. I'm going to give my opinion that I don't think the U.S. government or any of us in this room really have any business being in the mortgage industry. But as far as supporting Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I understand that 14 years ago, there was a point in time where we kind of needed to step in a little bit, but I don't think that that's necessary going forward. So as they taper the asset purchasing and the treasuries and everything, I think that we'll probably see more of a stabilization of interest rates where going forward 5, 7, 10, 12 years, barring some other huge catastrophe, they'll probably stay in a range. I would say maybe a 4 to 6% range. I tell my clients, I told them a few months ago, you know, a year and a half ago, doing 30-year loans in the 2s, you'll never see these rates again. I never will as long as I live, and I believe that. I don't think that as long as I live, will see rates where they were a year ago. Go ahead.
Speaking of fogging the mirror, I don't want to get too far off topic, but how do you think the labor market is going to affect us moving forward? I don't see that getting any better.
Yeah. So the labor market needs help. And it's going to have to be through carnage, in my opinion, unfortunately. So people that are either going to college to be XYZ or they're working white-collar professional jobs, I think as the economy slows a little bit, some of those jobs are going to go away. And those workers will be forced back into more blue-collar jobs, which would be, you know, what I believe what you're calling the labor market, you know, the more of the blue-collar labor, if you will. I mean, You don't drive past investment banks often right now and see help wanted signs on the door, but every job that requires somebody to be doing some form of manual something has a help wanted sign on, so that's really the differentiator, I guess. And it might not be because they want to. People aren't going to go to college for 4 or 6 years because they want to be a welder, but they could end up doing that. And I don't want to say that like it's derogatory. I have tons of respect for tradespeople and laborers of all sorts. Everybody that does something like that is necessary for us to do everything that we do in our lives. But I just think that it's going to be a little bit of Darwinism in the labor market, and people will be forced to do things they don't want to maintain a job. Yeah.
What do you think about all these Gen Z kids that are making 6 figures from their home on their internet? That's why they're not working at McDonald's. My 21-year-old son sold an NFT for $250,000. We're talking about a little Minecraft pixelated thing that doesn't, you know what I mean? I don't see any value in art, but because it's hooked to blockchain, he made it. I mean, why would he want to work at McDonald's? He probably made, for selling that one piece of art, he probably made enough money that for 10 or 15 years working at McDonald's.
Yeah, and if you would have told me he made $250 million, I would say, man, he probably will never enter the job force. But
I mean, there's Facebook influencers,
YouTubers, all that kind of stuff.
I know there's a lot. I know this girl's. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to get way off topic, but you talked about the labor market.
Yeah.
And I know this girl who just does the thing every morning. She does her makeup, and she's got like 2 million people that watch her put her makeup on every morning.
And the makeup companies pay her. Yeah.
See, she knows.
Yeah.
She knows.
So my personal take on that is I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, show me one person that has made a career of that for 20 or more years. I don't think it exists.
I think it does have something to do with, Jack in the Box having to lower their hours because they don't have enough people there.
Yeah, very true. Go ahead.
The second part of that, those people who are making that kind of money don't have a damn clue how to save it.
Yeah.
That's true.
Broke as hell.
True.
As soon as they contribute.
It's true. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add to the point of the job market, what a lot of people don't realize is that today we have the technology to replace every single job that has a component of manual labor. All of them. Not just 1 or 2, not 90%. We can replace them all. The only reason it hasn't happened is because mainly cost and social stigma. So if you think the labor market's not going to go away, just sit back and watch.
Well, and I mean, even though the unemployment rate right now is relatively low, hovering right around 5% somewhere, explain to me why and how 5% of the United States doesn't have a job. It doesn't even make sense.
That doesn't include a whole slew of extra numbers.
Yeah, people who don't want to work. Yeah.
Or they're unemployment right now.
What's that? Yeah.
Because they used it all.
Yeah, it's true. Mark, go ahead.
First of all, I think my favorite part of your presentation was when you said about the gas lines in the 70s. You had to read about them in the history books, but I actually sat in those lines.
I was in the back seat of the car, just for the record. I didn't have a car seat, so I was rolling around, but I was back there. No seatbelt.
We all know the Federal Reserve, of course, increased short-term rates by 50 basis points, which is the largest increase in over 20 years that they've done that. They've talked about continuing on. We know that it has a ripple effect on mortgage rates. So can you speak to maybe what your thoughts are in terms of how much more they might be going up this year, and also maybe into next year, and what that might have?
Yeah. So I think the Fed Chairman Powell is mentioning maybe 4 more increases this year, so another full percentage rate. A whole nother presentation that I'm not even going to breach tonight is how short-term interest rates affect long-term interest rates, and it's another very intriguing topic. But eventually we're going to end up getting into what's called an inverted yield curve, and if you've never heard of that before, I would advise you to maybe Google it or look it up. If you look at history over the last 100 years, most of the time, maybe every time that we end up with an inverted yield curve, it's a precursor to a recession. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but basically the short version is an inverted yield curve is when interest rates on shorter term investments are better than they are on longer term investments. So why would I buy a 30-year bond when I can get a better rate on a 10-year bond or something, right? So it's a really bad place to be. But going back to what you asked, Mark, I think it's that same kind of mentality. I think you'll get to a spot where short-term interest rates, overnight interest rates will start to be a lot closer and mimic longer-term interest rates for a while. I think that'll probably be the case for a while. Because what the average prime rate right now, what is it, 4.25%, I think. So now we're within about 1%, which is about the number of increases that they say we're going to have over the next year or so. I think maybe that's just for the rest of 2022. They might be another couple, 2 or 3 on the horizon in 2023. So yeah, we very well could get to the point where short-term rates like home equity loans and what impacts car loans and credit cards and the overnight rate that banks sell money to one another with, which is another convoluted topic, those rates will start to look a whole lot more like 30-year mortgage rates, and things will just all kind of be in this little cluster. Yeah. Any other questions? Mark, go ahead.
So Fannie and Freddie, of course, have announced that they're trying to scale back on second loans and investment property loans, which is a lot of what this room is, right?
Yeah.
Investment. So do you think there's going to be a channel or a niche of places like Umpqua Bank that say, hey, we'll portfolio those loans and be more competitive with Fannie and Freddie on second loans or second homes or investment property loans?
Yep. I think a lot of banks are already doing that. A lot of private lenders, equity firms, they're all starting to, try to find that niche to a certain extent. They're going to mitigate risk as much as they can. So basically, for everybody in the room that doesn't know, within the last few months, 3 to 6 months, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have gotten a lot of heat from investors, which is us. We're all, like I said earlier, you may or may not know it, but you're an investor in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as long as they're in conservatorship. And basically, we're pouring money into those GSEs, as they're called, and we are keeping them afloat. Well, a lot of people looked at what they were doing, and here they are facilitating loans for people that are buying rental properties and second vacation homes and third and fourth and fifth vacation homes all over the country. And basically somebody stood up and said, hey, why are we pouring a bunch of money into this thing for all these rich people? Because everybody that owns rental real estate and second homes is rich in the eyes of the investors, right? And I swear to you, that's how they think of this. Why are we lining the pockets of all these rich people with money that's being subsidized by the US government? And somebody went, yeah, good point. So they changed the way they charge for second homes to really more mirror, almost exactly mirror investment properties. So a year ago, the mortgage terms on a second home that you were buying were almost exactly the same as the home that you live in as a primary home. But that changed a lot a few months ago, and now there's extra points to be paid, extra fees, more qualification, things like that. So again, it's all part of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac getting out of conservatorship. I have a love-hate relationship with that because, again, as a tax-paying citizen of the United States, I don't want to be in that business. But professionally, I'm like, man, that kind of sucks that that those changes were made. So I don't know. I toss that one around a little bit.
Why are they still in conservatorship?
Because they haven't gotten to the point of solvency yet where they can get out of it. And, it's poor management. It really is. I mean, really, you look at the refinance boom that we just went through in the last 2 years, and I don't know the stats, but everybody and their dog refinanced over the last 2 years. And the finance people at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say, oh, well, yeah, but they all refinanced at rates that were so low that we can't make any money off of them, which is garbage. And so a year or two ago, a lot of lenders, a lot of lending institution banks, and they started charging a refinance fee, and that was passed through to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to help get them to the point where they can right the ship a little bit more and be out of the hole and get to the black on their balance sheets a little bit, and it was like a drop in the bucket. And so they really need a combination of things. They need higher interest rates, they need the fees that they're going to be collecting now on second homes and investments, and they need a long period of time that we haven't had in the last 15 years or whatever, where people are consistently making their mortgage payments. One of those charts I showed was 2008 and how many delinquencies there were. It took 5, 6, 7 years for that to get back down in the normal range. And then you had a couple of years where it was normal, and then all of a sudden COVID and people went into forbearance, and the banks and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, everybody quit getting mortgage payments, so they went further in the hole. Again, U.S. taxpayers are filling that gap for them, but it's still a little bit of a black eye on their balance sheet, really. It'll happen. It's just going to take a little bit more time. There's a lot of people that are interested in making sure that it happens sooner than later. Yeah. Anybody else? Questions, comments, anything? Okay. All right. Thank you.